In the forgotten annals of history, where ink has faded and parchment has turned to dust, lie stories that are not meant for the light. These are tales buried in the cold earth, whispered by the wind that howls through the ruins of fallen kingdoms. They speak of crowns forged in fire and ambition, of thrones built upon betrayal, and of the ghosts that linger in the silent halls of power. Our story tonight is one such echo from the past, a tragedy carved into the very stone of a once great palace. It is the tale of a queen whose beauty was a beacon, a king whose love for power became a poison, and a princess born into a gilded cage. This is the story of the queen who drowned in silence, a testament to the fact that the most agonizing screams are often the ones that are never heard, lost in the depths of a sorrow as vast and as deep as the sea. Before he was a king, he was Alaric, a man born from the unforgiving northern highlands with eyes like chips of ice and a will of unyielding iron. He was not the rightful heir. He was a second son, a shadow destined to serve. But the fire of ambition burned too brightly within him. Where others saw diplomacy, Alaric saw weakness. Where they sought peace, he found opportunity in chaos. He rose through the ranks of the military not with nobility, but with a brutal, chilling efficiency. He carved his kingdom from the flesh of his enemies and the bones of his rivals, uniting warring fiefdoms under a single, blood-red banner. The people, weary of conflict, hailed him as a savior. They saw a strong leader, a man who could tame the savage land. They did not see the hunger in his eyes, a bottomless abyss that could never be filled. They cheered as the crown was placed upon his head, unaware that they were celebrating the architect of their own future sorrow, a king who believed that a legacy was not built with love, but with fear. To solidify his reign and bring an air of legitimacy to his blood-won throne, King Alaric sought a bride from a southern kingdom renowned for its culture and grace. And so Queen Seraphina arrived, a lily blooming in a field of thorns. She was everything Alaric was not, gentle, compassionate, and wise. Her voice was like music in the cold stone halls, and her smile could soothe the most troubled heart. For a time, her light seemed to touch even the king's shadowed soul. He paraded her as his greatest treasure, a symbol of the peace and prosperity his reign would bring. The people adored her, seeing in her the promise of a gentler future. But the court was a nest of vipers. The lords and ladies who had clawed their way to power beside Alaric saw her kindness as naivety. They whispered in the shadows, their envy a slow-acting poison. Queen Seraphina, the jewel of the kingdom, was more isolated than anyone knew, a beautiful bird in a cage of gilded iron whose song was slowly, but surely, beginning to fade. A year into their marriage, the kingdom rejoiced. Queen Seraphina gave birth to a daughter, Princess Lyra. She was a perfect child, with her mother's gentle eyes and a spirit that seemed to promise a brighter dawn. Bells rang across the land and feasts were held in her honor. She was called the hope of the realm, a living symbol of the union between the king's strength and the queen's grace. To her mother, the princess was everything, a reason to endure the chilling drafts of the palace, a pure soul to protect from the creeping darkness. The queen would spend hours in the nursery, singing soft lullabies, her tears sometimes falling silently onto the infant's silken blankets. But for King Alaric, the birth of his daughter was not a moment of paternal love, but one of strategic calculation. He saw not a child, but a dynastic tool, a princess to be married off to secure an alliance, a bloodline to cement his legacy. The innocent life that brought so much joy was, to him, just another piece on the great, bloody chessboard of power. The joy surrounding Princess Lyra's birth was fleeting, a brief candle flame flickering against a gathering storm. The palace, once a symbol of Alaric's power, began to feel like a tomb. Whispers slithered through the halls like serpents, carrying tales of the king's growing paranoia. He trusted no one. His most loyal generals were replaced by spies, and every council meeting was thick with suspicion. The queen felt the change most acutely. The warmth in her husband's eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. He would lock himself away for days, poring over maps and informant reports. Envy festered among the nobility. They resented the queen's influence and the people's love for her. They began to sow seeds of doubt in the king's mind, hinting that her gentle nature was a facade, that her foreign blood made her untrustworthy. The shadows in the palace were no longer just an absence of light. They were alive, breathing with conspiracy and malice, slowly encircling the queen and her innocent child. King Alaric's ambition had become a raging sickness of the soul. His own kingdom was no longer enough. He dreamed of an empire stretching to the ends of the earth, his name a word spoken with fear and reverence for 1,000 years. This insatiable hunger drove him to madness. He levied crushing taxes on his people to fund his endless wars, turning fields of wheat into fields of mud and blood. The cheers that had once greeted him turned into muttered curses. When Queen Seraphina, horrified by the suffering, pleaded with him to show mercy, to remember the man he once was, he cast her aside. He accused her of weakness, of having a woman's heart unfit for the cruel realities of rule. Her compassion was, in his eyes, a betrayal of his grand design. The king who had been a hero to his people was now their tormentor, a man so obsessed with the legacy he would leave behind that he was actively destroying the kingdom he fought to build. He was a monarch marching toward a glorious future, deaf to the sound of his own world crumbling behind him. This is where the silence began to consume Queen Seraphina. She was a prisoner in her own home, her pleas ignored, her wisdom discarded. Her days were spent in a state of quiet dread. The laughter that once graced the palace halls had died, replaced by an oppressive stillness. She walked the gardens alone, the vibrant flowers seeming to mock her with their beauty. The tears she shed were secret, falling only in the dead of night when the castle slept, for she knew that any show of sorrow would be twisted into a sign of weakness by her enemies at court. She watched her husband transform into a monster, a stranger wearing the face of the man she had married. She saw the fear in the eyes of her servants and the growing gauntness in the faces of her people. Her struggle was a silent one, a battle fought within the confines of her own heart. She was the queen, yet she was powerless. Her title was a mockery, her crown a weight of sorrow pressing down upon her brow, and her silence was the heaviest burden of all. And what of Princess Lyra, the kingdom's hope? She grew up amidst this cold and silent conflict, an innocent flower trying to blossom in poisoned soil. She was a child of whispers and shadows, sensing the profound unhappiness that saturated the very air she breathed. Her mother, Queen Seraphina, tried to shield her, creating a small bubble of love and stories within the suffocating confines of the royal chambers. But the king's influence was inescapable. He saw his daughter not as a person, but as a future asset. Her lessons were not in art and music, but in lineage and political geography. Suitors were being considered before she even knew what love was. Her destiny was a fragile tapestry, woven with threads of political ambition she could not comprehend. She was caught between a mother's desperate, silent love and a father's cold, calculating ambition. Princess Lyra's fate was never her own. It was a script written in the ink of her father's greed, a tragedy waiting for its final, heartbreaking act. One stormy night, while searching for an old book of poetry to soothe her restless mind, Queen Seraphina's hand brushed against a loose stone in the royal library's grand fireplace. Behind it, she found a small, iron-bound box. Inside lay a single, sealed letter, written in a hand she did not recognize. Her heart pounding, she broke the wax seal. The words on the page were a venom that seeped into her soul, revealing a truth more monstrous than any she could have imagined. The letter was from a dying royal guard, a confession of his role in a long-forgotten tragedy. It stated in stark and chilling detail that King Alaric was never meant to rule. He had murdered his own elder brother, the true heir, in a staged hunting accident years ago, clearing his path to the throne. The secret was the dark foundation upon which Alaric had built everything. The queen now understood his paranoia, his cruelty, his desperate need for control. It was the frantic effort of a usurper and a murderer to outrun his own ghosts, and in that moment she knew her silence was no longer a choice. It was a death sentence. The kingdom could bear no more. Fueled by famine and the king's tyranny, the people's despair erupted into a wildfire of rebellion. It began as a riot in the capital, but soon became a raging torrent of righteous fury that swept across the land. The armies, stretched thin by Alaric's pointless wars and demoralized by his cruelty, began to desert. The rebellion reached the palace gates not as a whisper, but as a roar, the collective cry of a people pushed past their breaking point. The great doors splintered under the assault, and the mob poured into the pristine halls, their torches casting a hellish glow on the tapestries depicting the king's hollow victories. The sound of steel clashing with steel, of screams of terror and rage, echoed through the corridors. The throne of Alaric, built on a secret murder and cemented with the suffering of his people, was finally beginning to crumble into dust and ash. The day of reckoning had come. In the heart of the chaos, King Alaric had only one fear, the secret the queen now held. As the palace burned, he found her not in her chambers, but in the moonlit tranquility of the royal gardens by the edge of the reflecting pool. She looked at him not with hatred, but with a profound, heartbreaking pity. We will never know what words were exchanged in those final, desperate moments. Did she plead for her life? Or did she finally speak the truth, damning him with the name of his murdered brother? The castle records, written by the victors, claim she took her own life, driven mad by the siege. But the truth is far darker. The last thing she saw was the face of her husband, a mask of cold resolve. She was silenced forever, her body gently pushed into the cold water, her final, unheard gasp creating ripples that disturbed the perfect reflection of the moon. They found her at dawn, floating like a fallen angel. The queen, who had lived in suffocating silence, had finally drowned in it. With the queen gone, the last vestige of King Alaric's humanity vanished. He fought like a cornered wolf, but his strength was no match for the tide of hatred he had unleashed. The rebels captured him not in a blaze of glory, but cowering behind his own throne. There was no grand trial, no solemn sentencing. They ripped the crown from his head and tore the royal silks from his body, leaving him in rags before the very people he had oppressed. He was dragged through the streets, the stones of his own capital slick with the blood of his loyalists. His end was not a noble execution befitting a king, but a brutal, ignominious death at the hands of the mob. They gave him the same mercy he had shown his own people. None. The man who dreamed of an eternal empire was left a broken, nameless corpse in the mud, his grand ambitions reduced to nothing, his name forever erased from the history he so desperately wanted to command. The new regime, wishing to purge the land of Alaric's tainted bloodline, had one final piece to address, the Princess Lyra. Some called for her execution, a final, clean break with the past, but others argued that the child was innocent, a victim of her father's sins. And so they chose a fate they deemed merciful, but which was perhaps the cruelest of all. Princess Lyra was not killed. She was erased. She was locked away in the highest room of the northern tower of the very palace she was born in. Her existence became a state secret. The world was told she had died of grief. For the rest of her days she lived as a ghost, watching the seasons change from a single barred window, the silent witness to a world that had completely forgotten her. The hope of the realm lived and died in that stone cage, her laughter, her tears, and her entire life, a secret kept by the cold, unforgiving walls of her lonely prison. Years turned into decades. The new republic that replaced the monarchy proved to be just as corrupt, and the people's suffering simply took on a new name. The great palace of King Alaric was abandoned, left to crumble under the weight of its own dark memories. Weeds choked the gardens where the queen once walked, and the reflecting pool where she met her end became a stagnant, murky grave. The tower where the princess was imprisoned stands empty, a hollow finger pointing at a forgetful sky. The story of the ambitious king, the silent queen, and the forgotten princess dissolved into folklore, a scary tale told to children to warn them of the dangers of power. The stone halls that once echoed with music and conspiracy now hold only the sound of the wind, which seems to whisper their names: Alaric, Seraphina, Lyra. A king, a queen, and a princess, all consumed by a legacy of blood, betrayal, and sorrow. What is a kingdom but a stage for human tragedy? What is a crown but a promise of a heavier burden? The tale of Queen Seraphina is a haunting reminder that power does not corrupt, it reveals. It revealed the monster lurking in the king's heart, and it revealed the profound strength in the queen's agonizing silence. Her death was not an end, but a message that echoes through time. That ambition, left unchecked, will always devour love, innocence, and hope. It is a lesson written in the ruins of castles and the unmarked graves of royalty. In the end, it was not the rebellion that destroyed the kingdom. It was the forbidden secret, the silent tears, and the unheard screams that poisoned it from within, leaving behind nothing but the ghost of a story, and a queen who was finally and eternally at peace in the deep, quiet waters of silence. History bleeds, and its echoes are written in the cries of kings, queens, and lost princesses. This was the Fear Room. Don't forget to subscribe and like for more dark history tales.